Well, good evening and happy Shabbat to one and all. I'm here with Kirk. And Kirk, before we begin, and we're going to dig into what I think is the single most important subject in the entirety of God's message to us, which is how to become part of the covenant. Chapter 10 and 11 of Observations for Our Time are based exclusively on the terms and conditions of the covenant, all the conversations Yahweh had with Abraham, and then the test that Abraham had to pass for God to say, you qualify. And we'll dig back into that in a moment. I just read an article today that I found absolutely astonishing. Yeah. The article was on the United States Department of Defense. It has decided that it needs to change its focus. That previously it had been focusing on Islamic jihadists as the principal foe America faces. I mean, after all, we made Afghanistan worse in a never-ending war. We're still there. We completely destroyed Iraq, gave it to Iran, and turned the world upside down. Essentially, lit the fuse for World War III by doing that. And then we invaded Syria. No timetable to get out. Have completely destroyed that country. Have sent millions upon millions of Muslim refugees throughout the world, spreading their cancer. And in the meantime, we also used our military to bomb and destroy Libya. Mm-hmm. So no, we don't want to see what we can do with our military to make it maybe once in a lifetime effective somewhere in the Islamic world. We're just going to continue to blow up the Islamic world and make it worse. No, according to the 11-page report on the new focus of the U.S. military, it is no longer Islamic jihadists and Islamic terrorists. No, our new enemies, Russia and China. When was the last time that America faced a military threat from Russia?
Never.
Well, I guess when we were manufacturing bombs and airplanes and tanks and everything else for Russia, and they used our weapons against us. They used our weapons against us in Vietnam. So they fought a proxy war against us in Vietnam, and then we fought a proxy war against them in Afghanistan. That worked out miserably for both countries, enough that if you were a rational, moral person, if you were a citizen of either country, you would hate your country for what it did. And in China, when was the last time we fought a war against China?
We never did there either.
Oh, no, that's not also.
There's a boxer rally, but
not quite true. It's just like Russia. We did, the last war that Russia was wholly involved in, Russia was an ally of the United States. That would be World War I. We fought Russia by proxy. We fought Russia by proxy in Vietnam, and then by proxy in Afghanistan. No, we fought China by proxy too. Yeah. Korea. After the United States turned on Chiang Kai-shek and scuttled him, and then started funneling our weapons to Mao Zedong, Mao Zedong thanked the United States by first of all killing about 40 million of his own people, 50 million of his own people, and then he invaded North Korea so that Americans would lose another 35,000 troops in North Korea thanks to China. That was the last time we fought China.
Yeah, but we never had a threat from those people. We chose to go do battle with them because we didn't like what they were doing or what we perceived them to do.
We actually had no threat ever from Vietnam.
No. I mean, they never said, "Oh, gosh, I'm coming to your stores."
Vietcong could care less about the Russians and us until we invaded, and once we invaded, the Russians decided to arm them, but they were giving them arms that American companies were making for them. And in North Korea, had we not invaded North Korea, we would never have confronted Chinese troops. And last time I checked, North Korea was on the border of China. It is not on the border of the United States.
Right.
But since that time, we've had absolutely no military interaction with either country. So the person who is releasing the so-called national defense strategy, that's why I just despise the U.S. military. I mean, I despise it with every fiber of my body. He said, we face growing, this is his quote, we face growing threats from revisionist powers as different as China and Russia, nations that seek to create a world consistent with their authoritarian models, Defense Secretary Jim Mattis said in a speech presenting the document. What a piece of crap.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse my French. What in the hell is a revisionist power? First of all, what is a revisionist power? Why didn't somebody stand up and say, what in the hell is a revisionist power? What does it mean to revise? What are they revising?
Well, if they're thinking they're trying to convince you it's the old Soviet Union, that's not so easy. I mean, these people are very nationalistic, and who cares?
I have no clue what a revisionist power is, and I am absolutely certain that the United States has not faced a threat from China or Russia in the last 50 years. I am positive.
For 50 years, at least, doing so much of my lifetime, they've had to give them wheat in Russia so they wouldn't starve. That's not your enemy when you're doing that. And in
our
China,
biggest trading partner in the world is China.
Our biggest trading partner, is China. Right. And of course, Russia has half of the control of the other minerals that China doesn't. So,
I would agree that politically, China is authoritarian. But
not
when
to us.
When did we not learn that you cannot impose democracy? That if a country wants to be authoritarian, they're going to be authoritarian. Did you see China trying to export communism into Japan, into South Korea, into the Philippines? Do you see any place where China is trying to impose communism on a surrounding country? Are they going to Afghanistan and say, America really messed you up. What you need is
you need communism. Yeah, right.
So are they spreading communism? That was our old domino theory. No, they are not. They're our largest economic trading partner. China has no ability whatsoever under any circumstance to project a force, invade anything bigger or further away than Taiwan. They have no means whatsoever to project a force. And since countries are businesses, if your largest trading partner, far and away, was the United States, if you were China, and by the way, you own enormous amounts of the United States because you've got to do something with all the money they throw at you for goods and services. Yeah. Would you invade a country that A, you own, and B, is the dominant
no, you're destroying yourself.
Proponent of your economy?
Yeah, you're going to blow up yourself. I mean, your customers and plus stuff you already own. You just don't do it.
It's ludicrous. Okay.
Yeah.
And then with Russia, he calls Russia authoritarian. Excuse me. Last time I checked, they have elections there. People choose their own leader. You may not like Putin. I happen to like him. But you may not like Putin. But he's no more authoritarian than is the President of the United States.
Less, I would think.
Is Mattis still living back in the old evil empire days? Is he that stupid?
Apparently, or he thinks you are. You being collective us.
And then he blames, he says, that China was not as brazen as Russia was in their use of their military power, and he blames them for the invasion and the annexation of the Ukraine. Well, when it comes to Crimea, the people voted 98% to 2% to be part of Russia.
Yeah.
And the only reason they were put in a position to vote is because the United States State Department inspired the riots that overthrew the popularly elected government.
Yeah.
And then you had the people in the eastern part of the Ukraine that speak Russian, that are ethnically Russians, that their heritage has always been with Russia, and now the United States goes and screws it up and creates a government by coup as opposed to election. And we're mad at Russia for intervening in the Ukraine when it's the United States that is arming the Ukraine, the United States that is funding the Ukraine, the United States that inspired the coup? I mean, do these people think that everybody they're talking to, including the press, are absolute nincompoops?
They must be.
God, you read this kind of stuff, and you have a country that has failed miserably every time it is tempted to invade, occupy, or modify an Islamic country. Afghanistan twice, Iraq, Syria, the Sudan, Somalia, Libya, Egypt. Everything we've touched in the Islamic world with our military, we have made a disastrous mess, made the situation infinitely worse, pushed the world to the precipice of World War III. And now,
we want to pick on the other guy.
Russia and China, we're picking a fight and saying they're public enemy number one. They're a real threat. They're the revisionist power. And therefore, we need to go after them. You know, where is Russia saying to countries, you know, you better have our brand of government, or else we're going to send in our military?
Nowhere.
They blame them for intervention in Syria. That was one of the State Department claims. That's why we got to be prepared for Russia. They blame them for intervention in Syria. Last time I checked, Syria's largest trading partner was Russia. What did they expect? We were making a mess of it. We were going to overthrow Assad. We were going to overthrow Assad like we did Saddam Hussein, like we did Gaddafi, making the situation infinitely worse with those who replaced them. We were going to create exactly the same mess in Syria. And the Russians kept us from shooting ourselves in the third foot. I mean, if we have 3 feet, that was going to be the third shot in the foot, and they kept us from doing it.
Well, that was the only thing that kept us. Remember, we were doing Syria at the time on your day show, and Shattering Mist, and we were saying, my gosh, how can this prophecy come true about Damascus? Because over there about to blow this place up, and then Russia stepped in, and obviously Yahweh's already seen that to know that. Or he had seen ahead of it, know that it didn't happen. So we were trying to figure out.
We could not have made it to 2026, 2027 for Damascus being a heap of rubble if Russia had not intervened.
Right.
Because the way the United States was going, we were going to turn that entire region into a living hellhole where no one could live. It'd send everybody in that region to countries around the world.
It was interesting. Most of the I was reading some stuff on the people that were moving away from there. Most of them moved towards the government in that thing. You know, there's something like 4 or 5 million Syrians who, instead of fleeing to other countries, they flew to the side where the Assad was. So what does that tell you on what side you picked?
It tells you exactly the same thing
Refugees,
that we should have learned elsewhere. The Roman Catholic Church is God's number one enemy on the planet. But when the Pope went to Syria, he knew where he had to ally, because Assad was far more willing to protect Christians from being molested by Muslims,
right,
than any other of the foes that are fighting there. And look at Syria, that whole mess that we equip and arm and deploy the Kurds. We use the Kurds to wipe out the Islamic State in Syria. And today, Turkey started a long campaign of bombing the very Kurds that removed the Islamic State.
Yeah. We are so stupid.
Oh, God. So you read this kind of stuff, and you realize how stupid we are. Now, the reason I wanted to start with this is because one of the things that we talked about as we began our presentation, and it'll be posted on the various sites, I think, quite soon, about the program we did today on the first 2 statements about the introduction to the covenant discussions with Abraham, is that the first man's name that is mentioned is Towrah. In fact, I'll read Bereshith in the beginning, Genesis 11:26. And Towrah, the living embodiment of the 2 messages of Towrah, proclaiming the joyous news of God's beneficial healing while rebuking man's fraudulent treachery and deceit, lived 70 years, and he fathered Abram, Nachor, and Haran. Now, our whole discussion began with the realization that in those 4 names, everything you need to know is laid out before you. If you are thoughtful, everything you need to know. And Towrah's name is important because he is the name that says there are 2 forks in the road here. You can go right, you can go left. You go left, you're going to stay with man. You're going to die with man. You go right, and it'll take you to Yahweh. There's a path to Yahweh, and then there's man's ways which lead away from him. Reliance on one's military for protection is walking away from God. There is no one on the entire planet in the history of mankind who has relied on their military for their freedom, for their protection, that is in heaven or that will ever end up in heaven. I mean, Yahweh's statements in Yeshaya 10 and 14 about the military, he is literally turning everyone involved in the military worldwide into goo, liquefying them.
Yeah.
He wants nothing to do with them. He thinks they're revolting. And so if you are among those who are engaged in militarism, think that your military is part of the solution, that they're going to protect you, you're through. It's over.
Mm-hmm.
No chance whatsoever.
Yeah. Go back to Samuel. He said, "Don't have one army." This is what.
Yes.
How many times did Yahweh have to say, "Don't do this"? Before you.
Yeah, you'd think after a while, people would gradually begin to figure it out. But that's the story that we need to hear more and more. We need to hear the story of the fact that there are 2 ways. There's man's way and there's God's way. And that, hang on one second, let me take care of my puppy dog. I'll be right back with you.
Certainly.
My apologies, but she's old, lame, blind, and if she gets up and starts walking towards the door and I don't deal with it, then my next chore is to deal with clean that pee from the carpet. Not my favorite thing to do, and it was time. So that was, life gets in the way, and I don't apologize too for a dog. A dog is just such a perfect presentation of unconditional love. They are, for those who have not had a dog, and I know you've had dogs, but if you've not had a dog yet, that's really an experience that I would encourage everyone to have, just to enjoy their companionship. But that's the meaning of Towrah, and that's why I wanted to talk about the stupidity of squandering $1 trillion a year in the U.S. military based upon idiots like Mattis saying that, it's the revisionist nations, Russia and China, those authoritarian models, and try and seek to create a world consistent with their authoritarian model. Here's the United States is engaged in more nation building than the rest of the world combined. Probably since the Carthaginians, no one has been as much focused to trying to make the world in their model than the United States. Russia and China aren't doing that at all. And yet we blame them for doing what we have been the worst at in the history of humanity. So Towrah represents that. Towrah is saying you got 2 paths. You can join the stupidity of humankind, and you can slurp that stuff up like it's Kool-Aid, because there wasn't a single reporter or politician there that said, "Hey, wait a minute, stupid." That's the most absurd thing I've ever heard. What, are you crazy? But no one was there. And, of course, the next 3 names are the 3 doors. Abraham, the father who lifts up, he represents door number 1 into the covenant. Nachor means the one who snores. He represents door number 2, which is into oblivion. You go through life comatose, you never wake up.
Be a couch potato, that's okay. But there's no reward at the end. There's no relationship at the end.
No heaven, no hell. we get letters from people time to time that says, I think what you're saying about God is true and that the covenant is true, but I can't accept it because my son or daughter died, and I have to believe they're in heaven, that I will see them one day. So I'm going to take a pass. And I'm sorry, your son and daughter are not in heaven. No, they're not in hell either. They're not in heaven. They've because of your poor decisions. They don't know Yahweh or theirs. They don't know Yahweh. Yahweh does not know them. They just simply don't exist. All that exists of them is in your memory. And if you continue to be religious, believing that they're in heaven, then the only memory of them, which is in your minds,
will fade
will die
away.
Yeah, will die. Yeah, right along with you.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's the nature of things. So Abraham represents that. Nahor represents the door number 2, and Haran, he is door number 3. He was the high and mighty one who, by high and mighty, he's dealing with politicians and religious leaders. He is the promoter of such things, and so he represents door number 3, the express ticket to Sheol. The next statement is, and so from this perspective, the word for perspective was Elah. Elah means both oath and curse, promise of the covenant and condemnation. Again, it's showing that there are 2 ways to go, and you can choose one or the other. You can't have both. Mm-hmm. And that needs to be absolutely drilled into people's heads. If you want to be religious, that's your choice. You will never know God. If you want to be political, that's your choice. You will never know God. You want to be patriotic, that's your choice. You will never know God. You want to be pro-military, that's your choice. You will be excluded from heaven. Period. There are no exceptions.
Christianity and Easter with you either. That's the most disgusting thing to God you can absolutely have around you.
So if you're any one of those 4 things, you are religious, political, patriotic, or militaristic in nature. You will never, those are choices that preclude you from knowing Him. Now, it does not mean that if you were to forego those 4 things, which very few people will do, but if you were to forego all 4 of those things, that does not get you entrance into heaven, but at least gets you in a position where you have that opportunity. Mm-hmm. The opportunity is not even available to you.
They'll never talk to you till you do.
Correct. So it is from this perspective that the account of Towrah, that's the living embodiment of the 2 ways. Towrah fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Those are the 3 doors. And then Haran fathered Lot. Lot means one who is shrouded, blocking any association with the light. Now, Kirk, we talked about this in the previous show, but the thing most people don't understand about Lot is that Christians think that, God himself saved Lot. Lot had to be a really good guy. No, Lot was a piece of crap. Lot was a piece of crap.
I doubt if he was practicing Pesach in Sodom either.
No, of course not. He chose to go to Sodom.
It could only be because of Abraham.
he was offering his daughter's virginity to be raped from her. No. He ended up having incest with his daughters. He got drunk and lost control. No. That Lot is not a good guy. Lot was spared, not because of Lot, but because of Abram. Yahweh loved Abram, and Abram was negotiating with him, saying because there's, I don't know why he didn't just come out and say it. It was, 1,000 good people, 100 good people, 50 good people. Why didn't you just come out and say, hey, my nephew Lot's down there. Uh-huh. could you spare him before you destroy the place? And God essentially said, that's what I'll do. So then Haran, in the presence of Towrah, his father, in the country of his relatives, and with whom he identified politically and religiously, Moledeth, of his birth with a focus on the customs and culture of his people.
That's what it means,
Yeah, that's what it means. In of the Casdim Babylonians. So then Haran perished. I think I forgot to read the word perished. I'm sorry. So Haran perished is the verb, Muth, died a mortal death, in the presence of Towrah, his father, in the country of his relatives with whom he identified politically and religiously, in of the Kasdim, the Babylonians. What happens if you don't get out of Babylon? At the end of your life, whenever it is, short, long, if you never leave Babylon, what happens?
You're still down to two choices. You're supporting it, you're preaching it, and there's death either way. It's just whether your soul will continue to be in a disgusting place. Yep.
Yeah, you've eliminated door one. You're going to either die and cease to exist, or you're going to die and your soul is going to Sheol.
Yeah. And it has to be that way for Yahweh to be fair. So it's not a...
Correct.
What else can you do?
So the story of Haran ends right there because he never left Babylon. Mm-hmm. Because he never walked away from the religion or politics of his people. There's no covenant for him, no heaven for him, no relationship with God for him. The best thing that could ever have happened to Haran is that death was the end of his life. That's it.
Yeah. But so that is true. I expect he would be in Sheol just because of unless it's a total metaphor or something. It's still three places, and he qualifies for the third place. So
he sure does. Yeah, I'd be surprised if Haran is not in Sheol. I would agree with you completely. So he grasped hold of and took Abram. This is Lakah, third person masculine singular, and thus addressing Towrah. So this is not Yahweh took hold of. This is Towrah. So he grasped hold of and selected and led away Abram and Nachor. So Abram, father who lifts up, and Nachor, one who snores, with their wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, meaning noble woman, wife with status, leader and branch, official offshoot. It's from Sarah, which is how she was originally named, or would ultimately become named, to contend and strive with, to engage and endure with, to struggle and wrestle with, to be empowered by and persist with, to exert oneself with and persevere, to be set free by an upright leader with royal birth who is empowered, a liberator. The name of Snor's father, Snor's wife, Nachor's wife, was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the high and mighty, whose fortress is overthrown and pulled down, who is now dead, the father of Milcah and the father of Yikah, observant. So all of these names tell us this story. So then Sarai, it's Saray, noble woman, this is Abram's wife, was infertile, for she was without child. Why do you think she was infertile?
Because, you speculated, I totally agree, it's because until she got away from that, she could produce nothing worthwhile until they got out of there. Once they walked away, then
Yeah, Yahowah wanted her first child with her husband, Abram, to be part of the covenant family.
Yeah.
And that's why, Abram having a son through Hagar was useless. He wanted the symbolism of you're never too old to become part of the covenant. Right. Moshe was 80. Mm-hmm. I was in my late 40s, almost 50. Mm-hmm. It's not uncommon to become part of the covenant late in life. He wanted to emphasize that, and wanted to emphasize that the covenant is like a human family. Mother, father, child. And the first child born to Abram and Sarah would be the first child of the covenant. So I think she was infertile because Yahweh wanted a tangible way to express how similar the covenant is to our everyday family lives. Now I've got to go and let my pooch in because it's still 6 inches of snow outside. I don't want her to freeze to death.
You get back.
So I'll be right back. Okay. So, Kirk, that was my Dan Rather moment where I walked away, let my dog back inside. But, we're for the moment of silence there for those that might complain. What are we paid for this program?
Oh, a great sum of nothing.
Yeah, that's correct.
There's a lot of tangible, but
it
ain't monetary.
We do it as a labor of love. I do care for my old, ailing, blind, and deaf dog, and so yes, I let her back in. Yes, so she wouldn't freeze out there.
Mm-hmm.
All right, this is now Barashith 11:31. Terach, according again, the embodiment of Towrah, the two ways. Grasped hold of and took Abram, his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, the wife of his son, Abram, Father who uplifts. Now, do you think there's a reason maybe that God is giving you all? I mean, we already know who all the players are, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing new here, but he is reinforcing the fact that this is an extended family.
Right.
He's establishing the relationship between Abraham and Terach, his father.
Right.
Because one of the terms and conditions of the covenant, you don't just walk away from your country, which they were doing. You got to walk away from your father's house. So it's got to be well understood that Terach, the fork in the road, as Yogi Berra would say. If you come to a fork in the road, take it.
Right.
That Terach, father, Abraham, son. Lot, nephew of Abraham, explains what happened in Sodom. And he was the son of Haran, who was now dead, the high and mighty, never left Babylon, probably in Sheol. His grandson, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, the wife of his son, Abram. And they came out with them from Ur of the Casdim, the Babylonians. Casdim means sages and astrologers, fortune tellers and magicians. The headstrong and the self-willed, the crippled, the lame, or those who crippled and lame, cause the stubborn to stagger and stumble. Ur is really the beating heart of the beast. I know that that first Babylon capital was in Nineveh, and then Nineveh later became the capital of Assyria, and that there was actually a city, first, second, and third city of Babylon itself, and that Babel is now the ultimate beast. It's the forefather of all beasts. But there was a city-state, a civilization that preceded them all.
Right.
That was the first to incorporate religion and politics and militaries and all of these kinds of things, come up with a writing system to convey them. And that was the city-state of Sumer.
Yeah. I looked both of those up between the shows after I walked my dog and we ate and everything. And everything there is pretty easy to find. It's the seat of the moon god worship. It became the sun god worship place. It became, light, flame, rising sun. I mean, it's
the
very
god
easy
that
to look
became
up
the god of Islam. Yeah, the god that became the god of Islam, the crescent moon, the moon god.
Right.
The moon god's name is Sen. And Sen was first conceived as a mythical god in Ur. And then the moon god religion of Sen, that's the crescent that Islam operates under, proliferated really all the way through the Mesopotamia, and particularly where they were going in Haran. Really, really prolific there. In fact, that ultimately migrated to become the principal seat of worship of the moon god Sen. So when Yahweh speaks of there's the greater and the lesser light, and you're wondering, why is he using the lesser light, the moon, to describe the Satan? Well, because the first guise that Satan used was as the moon god.
That's right.
Sin.
Moon god, yes. I use that in teaching. Interesting, perhaps a little side. When I teach art, and I'm talking about light hitting an object, and I'm talking about cold and warm colors, and I try to remind them that light reflects, and that the moon, of course, if you put moonlight on something, which is reflected light, a much diminished light form, everything becomes cool. And then if you put a warm in the sunlight, of course, everything is warm, and then I approach it from the very same way, trying to show them what warm light hits something and it's cold shadows and so forth and so on, without breaking into an art lesson. It's like people never really think about it very much.
No,
but it is.
No, it's also interesting, Kurt, that if you look at the difference between the sun and the moon.
I kept telling them the moon has no light. It's borrowing everything from the sun, and that's what Satan. So it's so good as a symbol for Satan because he has nothing.
Yeah, it's not just that the moon is 400 times smaller than the sun.
Right.
The moon has no light at all.
Yeah.
There really is no light of the moon.
Light.
No, all the moon does is it reflects the sun's light.
Right.
And so in the comparison between Yahowah and Satan, the Yahowah is the source of light. Satan simply reflects some of Yahweh's light.
Right.
And so the lesser light is just hugely different. And to appreciate is to understand that is where the first, I shouldn't say the first, because there is the possibility, not a possibility, a certainty. Yahweh speaks of first Babel, the Babel that was in the city of Nineveh when Nimrod established first Babylon in the city of Nineveh. That is the place where religion first took root. But the first place that was quantified, calibrated, promoted, turned into scripture that is recorded in the annals of human history, because we have nothing from that age of Nineveh and Babylon from Nimrod. Just is too far back, and it's buried too far under ancient archaeological ruins that we have no access to because of the malfeasance of Muslims. So the only place we can turn to verify what the culture was like is and represents essentially everything that God hates. Mm-hmm. So it shouldn't be a surprise that they come out of And you might say, wait a minute, why are you translating Kasdim as Babylonians? It typically is given this gloss of Chaldeans.
You're interchangeable.
But there really, as I've said so many times, there really is no difference between Sumer, Chaldea, Babylon, and Assyria. Even when Yahweh uses the Medes to describe a group of people, they and the Babylonians are indistinguishable. There is no distinguishing characteristic that said, these tribes are Assyrian, these tribes are Babylonian, these tribes are Chaldean, these tribes are from Sumer. It's all the same. Mm-hmm. Same people, same place, same ideologies.
Right.
So,
and everywhere you go, they talk about being astrologers and professional magicians and astrologers and on and on and on.
Right. So, yeah, that's one of the real problems of the Christian Christmas story is the three wise men. Well, they couldn't be wise men because they were astrologers. When people are seeking credibility, and they seek credibility by having people who believe things that are untrue, say, hey, wow, that must be true. It's like the Quran. They were so desperate to validate Muhammad. They had, every religious nincompoop alive that said, oh, yeah, I see the sign of a prophet's on him. He's got an apple-shaped mole on his back. It's desperate. And this idea that three wise men came from the east and gave him gifts. No. If they were wise, they wouldn't be astrologers. They wouldn't be sages in Babylon. They came from Babylon. They were religious nincompoops. A religious nincompoop saying, hey, wow, you are the cat's meow, does not add to one's credibility. They're lying about everything. So that is not a credibility boost for the Christian faith.
Don't hang your head on that one.
No. So they came out with them from Ur of the Babylonians, the Casdim, and walk to the land of Canaan, which means lowly and subdued, Kana, to be brought down because of a pretentious attitude. Now, at the time I wrote this chapter, I was unaware that we knew much about the Canaanite religion. And it was much later, much later, I think, like chapters 16, 17, 18, something like that. There was that's kind of the interesting about the connections that you make if you Google something. There was a reference to an Eastern star that was used in one of the depictions of the adversary of Hasatan, in reference to Assyria, I believe. And I decided, I'll track that down. That's interesting, because I would look at that as that's a direct reference to Hillel ben Shakar. Mm-hmm. And so I looked it up, and the first thing that as I was going down all the various things that I could learn about it, and that one of them cited the scriptures of the Babylonian religion. And so I followed it.
Hey now.
Son of God, we have found now tablets,
Catholic Church,
written in Hebrew that describe the Canaanite religion.
Yeah.
And son of a gun is Christianity.
Yeah.
It's the Lord God of Christianity. In fact, they even use both terms, Lord and God. The chief deity was Baal El, Lord God. And the whole religion is based on Christianity. So that was a really interesting awakening. So then this says, but they only came as far as Tehran. That's transliterated Haran, but it's the hard CH sound that begins it. Mm-hmm. And Haran is diseased by the sun, to taunt and jeopardize through blaspheme. I don't know if that was the case at the time, because I haven't studied the whole history of Haran. But I do know that at the time of the Babylonian fall, or 600-ish BCE, okay. Not the Babylonian, the Assyrian fall, when the Babylonians and the Medes collectively attacked Nineveh, and a couple of years later they were attacked, and Haran fell as well. That at the time, Haran was the center of the world for the worship of the moon god Sem. In fact, the old mosque, the great mosque of Haran, was a temple to Sem. But I think this predates that by, probably 1,500 years.
Yeah.
So the name, as the name implies, it may have been sun god worship at the time they were there. Anyway, they settled there. So they were at least had left Babylon. So the days of Terach, this would be Abraham's father, were 205 years, and Terach died in Charan. So while Haran died in Babylon, Terach died in Charan. What does that tell you about the fate of Abram's father?
He's going. Yeah, he has no hope.
Yeah. Now, my guess is that you are correct that Haran is in Sheol. I think that Terach just simply
necessarily his father walked him away. They walked away, but he never walked to anything. So he's probably just dead.
That is correct. Yep. So that is so profound, though, is that that Terach walked away from Babylon, led his family away from Babylon, but never walked to Yahowah, and so he simply ceases to exist, while Haran, the youngest son who died in Babylon, Haran. Haran is still there. He never left Babylon. He's going to go the way of Babel. Yeah, he is in Sheol. So just leaving Babylon is not enough to make one part of the covenant. All right, so he's got two members of the family died that did not get to know God. Now, this is but the preamble to the first 7 meetings between Abram and Yahweh. And while we are eager to read what Yahweh is about to say, let's consider something that until I had begun to put these thoughts down on paper, I had failed to notice. And it's no small thing. It was a little over a decade ago that I made my initial connection, noting that since Abram was born and had lived in Ur of the Chaldeans, a pseudonym for Babylon, God's subsequent instruction to walk away from his country should be interpreted as disassociating from what Babel represents.
Right.
The confusion and resulting corruption associated with man's political, militant, patriotic, and religious rhetoric. And while this conclusion is absolutely valid, this was too important a point to leave up to interpretation. So God was considerably more matter-of-fact than I had previously noticed. The first condition of the covenant, walk away from your country.
All right.
Tangibly, where was Abram?
He was already beyond that.
Right. Way beyond the borders and the influence of Babylon. Extremely important. You cannot come to know God. God's not going to introduce himself to you. He's not going to invite you to become part of the covenant, and you have no chance of getting to know him until you first walk away from your country. Now, that doesn't mean you have to do what Abram did in the sense of physically putting Babel in his rearview mirror.
You're right.
But it means to disassociate from, to reject the religious, patriotic, military, and political.
Well, that's all we can do, because everywhere we go, we're surrounded by it. I mean, from East Coast to West Coast, Canada to Mexico to South America, where are you going to go? You can be a hermit, I suppose, but that's about it. You cannot walk physically away from Babylon anymore. It's pervasive across the face of the earth.
But, it was the case of Moshe. Moshe walked away from Egypt because he was disgusted by what he witnessed there. Yeah. There was a reason that Abram walked away from from Babylon, because that was the power center of the world, the economic center of the world. They walked away because there's only one justification. They were disgusted by it. There was the things that were going on in Canaan were horrible.
Yeah,
they were disgusting. So he was walking away because, from their point of view, nothing could have been as bad as what they were leaving. We were told twice, once in Bereshit 11:28 and again in 11:31, that Abram, his father, and certain members of his family had come out of Casdan, Babylon, the realm of religious sages, astrologers who crippled the lame and caused the stubborn to stumble. But I had not previously considered what transpired between these two pronouncements. Initially, we are told that Towrah had lived childless for 70 years, what we would consider a full lifetime, with Babel as his only home and family. His firstborn was Abram, a child who would grow to become symbolic of the first family. He was named in honor of his mission, a father who lifts up and grows. But he was not an only child. There would be two more, Nachor, the one who snores, and Haran, representing the high and mighty who are overthrown, speaking of religious and political and militant individuals. Collectively, they represent the broad cross-section of humankind and are symbolic of the three doors, through which souls pass at the conclusion of their mortal existence. The covenant opens the door to God's home. Religion, politics, militarism, well, that opens the door to Sheol. And then you have...
Yeah, the sleepwalkers.
Yep. Abram would listen to Yahweh and accept the conditions of the covenant. As a result, he would be lifted up and grow. He would pass over the lone door and the first step to life with God. Nahor, the second-born, represents the masses and thus doorway number 2, apathetic and unaware, lazy and irrational. He was victimized by confusing religious and corrupting political rhetoric. Snoring when he should have been observant. He eluded his father's grasp and stayed in Babel. He had the life he sought to protect. After all, especially with a wife called queen. She may have been childish, but she was Babylonian royalty. As for Nahor, he's never mentioned again. He would simply cease to exist. Think about that. He is never mentioned again. It's the fate of all of those, infected with the Babylonian plague of death, the perverted rhetoric of religion and politics. The high and mighty Haran, the third-born, is symbolic of the religious, political, military, and economic elite and their fate. It's doorway number 3. He would surrender his mortal life in the presence of his father, Towrah, in the land of his relatives, surrounded and invested in Moladith, his culture, customs, community, identifying himself with the enlightenment of the Kashdem of the Babylonians who were overtly religious. By stating his fate this way, in this context, 2 things should become evident. First, by juxtaposing these things, Yahweh has defined Moladeth as Kasdim, a religious family, those who relate to sages and astrologers, fortune tellers and magicians, in addition to the enlightened, who are directed by the morning star and rising sun, those who cripple the lame and cause the stubborn to stumble. Collectively, religious conservatives and political liberals created the cultures, customs, and communities in which the plague of death had festered and grown. Haran, the high and mighty, would be overthrown and brought down by God in judgment. As a result, he would spend an eternity with his fellow babblers. And that's as we progress through Yahshua, we get up to the 12th, 13th, 14th chapters. God is saying, the high and mighty, he is going to bring down. He will have the high and mighty serve as slaves, popes cleaning out latrines in Israel. First, I was put aback by that, and the more I thought about it, the more appealing it became. You know, wouldn't you love to see old Donald Trump scrubbing out a urinal? You know, I'd put him in the ladies' bathroom, but blind. Have him scrubbing the floors. It's perfect.
God has a sense of humor.
It's also interesting to note that Haran fathered Lot, who would, by the way, if you want to know how to pronounce the O and the W in Lot, it's L-O-W-T. So L-W-T is the name. The vowel is Lot. We all know it's Lot. That tells you. I mean, there isn't anybody that would say that his name is what? Loot, Voot,
or Lat, or any of those. No.
Yeah. It's
we know
Lot.
what an O-W is, an O.
Right, and Lot the O sound comes from the Hebrew Wah.
Yahweh.
Say that because, it's Yahweh. Yeah. Who would choose to live in Sodom. Lot's judgment was so compromised, he offered his daughter's virginity to the Malak who were offering to protect him. Lot's wife also longed for the life that she had lived in Sodom, and she just couldn't walk away.
Now, by making that statement, if you long for the life of Sodom, and we know what Sodom was like, how corrupt are these people?
Yeah, bad. Yeah, they're bad.
I mean, it is just Sodom is like hell on earth.
Yeah, that's why I know that in Christianities there's this myth that somehow that Lot represents their rapture.
No.
And I think it even says that someplace. But no. Well, maybe he does represent. He might represent their rapture, all right, because they ain't going to heaven. Lot's not in heaven.
No.
That's just the bottom line here. He was a scoundrel. Lot's inebriation caused him to engage in incest. Yes, indeed. Children have a tendency to follow in their father's footsteps. And lest we forget, Haran also had a daughter, one named Milcah, queen, who married his brother, Nachor, one who snored. She, in all likelihood, is the reason Nachor remained behind. His third child and second daughter, Yikah, was observant, which would have been good if it were not for the fact that she remained a student of Babel.
Yeah.
When Yahowah mentions Sarai was infertile, it wasn't to tell us that she and her husband were childless. It was to reinforce the fact that man's way, the way of Babel, is sterile and barren, unable to conceive or uphold meaningful life. It would only be once Sarah and Abraham were in the covenant that they would enjoy conceiving life as Yahweh intended. It is at this point that we leave the city of Ur behind, of Satan's enlightened, and the Eretz, the realm and country of Castan Babel, the confusion and corruption of Babylon. And by the way, the religion, if you were to take the three religions most responsible, are most based upon intermixing, commingling truth and lies.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have Christianity,
right,
Islam, and Judaism.
Yeah.
Of the world's religions, those three are the most guilty of commingling the truth and lies, of mixing things together. So be careful out there, Christians. He left behind, also left behind is Terach's Bereth home, including the rest of his family, Nachor, Milcah, and Yikah. As such, you have probably noted the connection that I missed. The three things Yahweh will soon ask Abram to walk away from were described in the preamble to the covenant. Moreover, he has already put each of them behind him. That's not the end of it. Abram's mortal father took them from the furnace to the fire, out of Babel and to Charan. There, Abram, Sarai, and Lot would live, and Terach would die, diseased by the sun in Charan. He had walked out of Babel with the rest of them, but that would not be nearly enough. The other three would continue their journey to God. Two of them would find him. Since this is of utmost importance, it ought to be understood. Yahweh first met with and spoke to Abram in Charan, not Babel. After compromising mankind's language and dulling human rhetoric, seeing to it that their religious alternatives would be nothing more than a blending together of words and ideas to convey common notions, God had no interest in returning. He would meet Abram halfway, after he'd begun the process of disassociating from his country, its religious and political customs, and his father's house. Now, this realization is breathtaking in its consequence, because it suggests that Yahweh will meet those of us who have begun this process along the way, introducing himself to us while providing initial directions. God did not find Abram mired in the midst of Babel, just as he did not approach Moshe in Mitzrayim. But had God not reached out when and where he did, there would have been no covenant.
Torah.
I don't know how I could make this. I mean, I would love just to end the show right there and let all that sink in. We won't. We'll go on. We have another 30 minutes this evening, and we will go on.
Mm-hmm.
But there's very little out there, folks, that's more important than that. If you are a religious Jew, God's not going to meet with you. You will never know him. He's not going to introduce himself until you throw away the Mishnah and the Talmud, till you get rid of all your religious dress-up clothes, till you walk away from the synagogue and the temple. It is only after you stop depending on the things of religion that you have a chance of knowing God. Those of you who
I haven't really met anyone who wasn't in that situation, but when they finally started, when God talks to them, I mean, God talks to them when you start reading the Torah. So, but none of them start reading the Torah first. They start questioning that, and they literally walk away and then start a search, and then they find, fortunately for us, this generation, we can find you online, and then we can start reading the translation for the first time correctly, or at least as correct as we can possibly find. So it's that's the way it has to be. That's the way it is. That's what he said here. So I just don't. I haven't run across anybody that's done it any other way.
No,
have you?
I don't think there's any. It's not even worth wasting your breath on somebody who is religious.
Yeah.
They're not going to understand. They're not going to be open.
You like, and you might want to, but having done it a lot, it is total waste of time. I don't do it now. It's a complete and utter waste of time. If somebody is religious, they're closed off to God. God will not meet somebody who is religious. If you are going to a church, you are walking away from God, and He, so long as you go to church, so long as you believe in your religion, you have no chance whatsoever of knowing God. So that's what the story tells you, right? And I'm not missing anything. That's exactly the way Yah did it. If you want to do it like Yah, then
that is what the story should be telling
you. Then you can talk.
Right. If you're doing what God wants you to do, is I'm telling you this story, think about it. Why did I tell you the story this way? Why did God tell us where he first talked to Abram and where Abram had come from? And who had died and what their names were and where they had died?
Right. It's to let
what do you think the purpose of that is?
Yeah. I mean, it's crystal clear now.
I want you to understand what death represents. One died in Haran. One died in Babylon. And then once they were dead and now Abram was on his own, God introduced himself to him. It's so
powerful. That should tell you everything you need to know.
Yes.
I keep thinking back, when it says the Torah is complete and then every question you ask will be there. Yeah, we have to dig out a heck of a lot to read it, but that's what he wants you to do, is to study, get to know him, spend a lot of time with him.
Their meeting was brief and to the point, their initial meeting. They would not engage in conversation or relationship for some time. There would be more meetings and steps along the way. I remember my first meeting with Yahowah. I was an agnostic at the time. I had left Christianity. Too many unanswerable questions. And it's not like, that I didn't know the answer to those questions or couldn't figure out the answer. Those questions cannot be answered. There are 20 fundamental questions in Christianity which cannot be resolved. And the more you know, the worse it is. Like, the ultimate one. How could God die for your sins? A God that can die is not God.
Yeah. Who killed him?
And of course, the one that I think is the ultimate for a thinking individual is that if Christianity is half of its New Testament is based upon Paul's letters.
Right.
Paul claims to have been inspired by the God he consistently demeans and contradicts. That's just not possible. It is not possible that God inspired a man to condemn his testimony and to contradict him.
Well, there's some Christians somewhere who think that there's something, Christianity is not about Paul? If it's not, what is it about?
Oh, no. Christians think that Christianity is about Jesus Christ, not having any clue. There was no person ever named Jesus Christ. Yeah. And nor that they're unaware that Yosha was Torah observant and vehemently opposed to anything that was anything other than Torah observant, and that Paul was Torah trashing. and yet the religion is Torah trashing, Torah disregarding, when Yosha was Torah observant, Torah loving, Torah living. And no, they can't figure that out.
And
so
how
they,
can you hate?
They believe that Jesus started their religion, even though Jesus was, Yosha was adverse to religion. And they don't give Paul credit for being the forefather of their religion, because they are clueless as to realize that Paul spoke for Satan, even admits it. He didn't quote Yosha, he didn't quote Yahowah accurately.
That's really bad.
That's really bad. But read the end of 2 Corinthians. He was demon-possessed. I had the opportunity to ask a Christian theologian, that a couple of days ago. I said, so what was the thorn in Paul's side? I said, I suspect maybe he was a homosexual. I said, well, you don't have to suspect. He was a homosexual. That was not the thorn in his side. Yahowah, 666 years before Paul would utter his first words in his letter to the Galatians, told us that he'd be fascinated with the male genitalia. So, yeah, he was a homosexual. But surely, you've read the end of 2 Corinthians. What does it say? What was the thorn in Paul's side? Because it wasn't homosexuality. He answers the question. How come you don't know it? You're a theologian. That's really at the end of it. Yeah. I don't think there is one Christian in a million that knows the answer to that. They all know that Paul had a thorn in his side. They all speculate as to what it is. There's not one in a million that knows that Paul answered the question. In the same sentence that he speaks of the thorn in his side, he says that it's a messenger, an envoy from Satan. Demon. He was demon-possessed. Yeah, it's staggering. I can't think it through. What this all suggests, and to my mind confirms, is that God recognizes that he has deliberately put himself at a distinct disadvantage on earth as a result of the way he has chosen to engage relative to his covenant. If we were left entirely on our own devices, fewer than 1 in a million would pick up a copy of his Torah and find their way to their Heavenly Father. So Yahowah reaches out to those he suspects will be receptive to him, to those who have begun to question and disassociate from societal influences, especially religious rituals and political customs. His set-apart spirit can then provide those individuals with just enough guidance to help them continue to move in the right direction. But even then, the Ruach Kodesh does not leave her children to fend for themselves. So she continues to support their progress, guiding receptive men and women until the day comes that they decide of their own free will to engage in the covenant. And it's at this point that Yahowah is at his best. The universe was conceived to encourage and enable. Yeah. Therefore, using this example, we can surmise that we do not find Yahowah entirely on her own. God reaches out to those who demonstrate a willingness to disavow humanity to know him. Had he not done so, I wouldn't be here. No. And if I was not here,
I wouldn't be here.
Then I would say that everyone that's listening to this program, not a single one of you would be here. Yeah. Yahowah reached out to Moshe. Had he not reached out to Moshe, there would have been no Torah.
There'd been no Aaron, no Aaron or any Torah either. Yeah, same thing.
Yeah, if Yahowah reached out to Abram, if it had not reached out to Abram, there'd be no covenant.
Right.
And you might say, "Oh, he just found somebody else." Oh, yeah. Okay. Let's put it in real terms here.
Who replaced Moshe with?
Yeah, that had grown up in Egypt, that understood the beast.
That was Yehuda.
That be recognized there. Who? I mean, anybody else, he has to teach them all about Egypt and teach them all about the covenant. Who?
Ain't happened.
Okay, let's just say that you take this thing the next step and say, all right, so if he didn't tap you on the shoulder and say, I want you to do this project with me, he'd have found somebody else. Oh, yeah? Pick one. I've been doing this now for 16 years. Why don't you tell me who? Because last time I checked, 100% of those who figured out the nature of the covenant and how to participate in it came because
because they read your books.
I said yes.
Your analysis and went back and checked it and said, wow.
Yeah,
he's
so
right.
I want
Don't
to
bother
be
me that
careful
you're right.
here.
I'm delighted.
Right. If you read Yahshua, one of the things you'll find out is that when Yahshua first enters heaven into God's home, the most disturbing statement of all comes next.
Yes.
Yahweh laments because there's no one at heaven's door. Not one person taking advantage of the covenant.
I opened my doors and nobody came.
Yeah, I opened the door and no one came. Right. And then he talks through the prophet and says, for all of these long centuries of time, there was no one. Not a soul.
And if you're one of those who think, well, he should have done something, he should have made it easier, what else could he do? He put it there. It's available. Anybody could go there and find it if they wanted to work that hard. And if eternal life is not worth working that hard, what is?
Yeah. What is?
So, I mean,
how are you going to spend your eternity?
He did everything. He said, he asked the question. He said, what more can I do? So answer the question, what more could he have done? I can't find anything he could do different without compromising.
We spent an hour this morning on 2 passages filled with names.
Yeah.
And we only hit the superficial stuff.
Yeah.
If that doesn't trip your trigger, God doesn't want you spending eternity messing up his plans and his family and his home. There's not only the terms and conditions of the covenant that are going to be laid out over the course of the following discussions, but also the test. You got to pass the test. Thank God there's a test.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you have hated to have had someone who was parroting all of the covenant rhetoric, claiming to be covenant like Larry and Fred that have just gone AWOL, and have them actually in the covenant with all of their disgusting and abusive rhetoric?
Well, that's taken care of. Later we read where he's very emphatic about those who belittle, besmirch, and so forth. Abram and his family, Yehudim. I have nothing to do with you. So
I have nothing to do with you. Yeah.
No, so
if you're going to be
you go down that road and don't expect Yahweh to ever save you. He'll turn around. You'll never come back. He won't. I doubt if he'll even allow you to come back the next time.
No.
If there was a next time.
So there is a test. There's not just 5 terms and conditions. You've got to pass the test.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about parroting. I will tell you for certain that Hasatan knows the 5 conditions of the covenant. He certainly knows Yahweh's name.
He could make the speech.
Yeah. He can make the speech. That didn't do him any good. This being the case, I suspect that Yahweh relies on his malach messengers to make the preliminary assessment, and that they know God's will and are similarly unconstrained by time. Yahweh's initial approach would then come by way of the Ruach Kodesh, the set-apart spirit. This would explain how Yahweh came to know about Abram's presence in Charan and why God was heard but not seen during their first meeting. Now, I heard God. I didn't see him. I didn't even know his name at the time that he asked me to do a mission that no one in their right mind would accept.
Not with Islam.
No one.
Rusty didn't like it, and of course we had the benefit of every Friday talking to your buddy.
Yeah, no chance of surviving.
That's dangerous stuff.
The dangerous stuff. So this would, the fact that he's introducing himself by way of the Malach, who, as I say, are unconstrained by time. Yet, since that would take, if God actually knew how we were going to respond at the time of the invitation, would take all the fun out of it for him. If you knew how everything was going to develop with Terry before you drew the first picture of her and began a conversation, it would take all the fun out of the relationship. So
sure.
God doesn't want to know how we're going to react and what everything we're going to do for the rest of our lives when he says hello. It's just an invitation. So it's more likely that based upon his Malak's assessment an individual's life and attitude, there is merely a reasonable likelihood of success. This would be a little like dating before marriage, introducing ourselves to someone we find attractive and have an interest in getting to know, even asking them out on a date. It does not constrain the other person's choices, but instead expands them. Mm-hmm. And most people wouldn't embarrass themselves by asking someone out that was likely to rudely reject them. Every relationship begins with an introduction. For something meaningful to develop from there, both parties have to agree to engage. And ultimately, they must not only like each other, but come to share common interests. So we ought not see Yahweh's waiting, just hoping that someone will read his Torah and answer his invitation. So long as we are willing to meet him halfway, he will find a way to introduce himself and initiate a relationship. Mm-hmm. That does not constrain our free will. No. It expands it. But even this wasn't my most glaring omission. So I'll ask you, is it possible that Yahweh could have actually asked Abram to walk away from his country, his community, and from his father's house, knowing he had already done so? It's a 600-mile walk from Ur to Haran. Since I suspect Yahweh is aware of the geography, walking away wasn't about leaving the physical place, but instead acquiring a new perspective. God wasn't thinking about the land of Mesopotamia, but instead of what Babel represents. Today's world. It's Christianity, Islam, Judaism. Just because Abram at this point, had put a considerable space between him and Babel, it is still likely that he dragged some of its cultural holidays and rituals with him, including the influence of the Babylonian educational system and its six-based mode of counting. Therefore, the religious and political institutions which dominated society should be seen as its molodeth. And the same is true as it relates to his father's home. It represents the family of man. The fact that Abram had physically separated himself from all three concerns, country, culture, and household, means that Yahweh was addressing the potential of a continued allegiance and thus the consequence of the ongoing influence of these things. It was, therefore, disassociating from what they represented that mattered to God. So let's just have a quick review of where we're going, Kirk. And if you have something you'd like to add, well, let's listen to that first.
Go ahead. That's fine.
I'll just say, okay, here's a quick summation of the first meeting between Yahweh and Abram, and we'll dig into each word here in a moment. It begins. Now, Yahweh said to Abram. Now, Yahweh said to Abram, at this time, at this place, are you following the story? Mm-hmm. It is for you, of your own free will, to approach by walking away from your country and away from your relatives' culture and customs, and also from your father's household, to the land which bestows the blessings of the relationship, which I will show you. Then I will engage on your behalf, continually acting to make for you a greatly empowered community comprised of every race, coming together, based upon a common relationship. And I will kneel down in love to bless you by lifting you up. And I will cause, as an expression of my will, your name to continuously grow in importance, so that you come to exist as a blessing, as a means of reconciliation in the covenant, creating a better circumstance. Then I will choose to favor and hold you in high regard, because it will be my desire and choice to kneel down in love, to greet you and welcome you in the spirit of reconciliation, blessing, uplifting, and showering you with gifts and prosperity, offering a beneficial covenant where the gift of life is afforded to those who hold you in high regard, who see you as a source of blessings, of reconciliation, and of the beneficial covenant. But then he who disdains or despises you, even trivializes you, he who views you as someone to be slighted, belittled, or underestimated, making you of little account, he who diminishes your overall significance or who dishonors you in any way, as well as he who causes anything associated with you to be seen as so simple and easy that it is underestimated and not taken seriously, I will actually